I'm begging you, just reconsider. Don't take everything from me.
A billionaire collapsed at his own Christmas gala in front of 500 guests. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. Champagne flowed freely. The most powerful people in Philadelphia watched in horror as one of the wealthiest. Men on the East Coast crumpled to the floor, clutching his chest. Chaos erupted. Security didn't know what to do. Guests stumbled backward in shock. Someone screamed for help. But one man pushed through the crowd with authority. One man dropped to his knees beside the fallen billionaire. One man placed his hands on that chest and began fighting to save a life. That man was a doctor, a brilliant cardiologist from the city's most renowned hospital. He was also the secret son this billionaire had abandoned before he was even born. The son he paid money to erase. The son he pretended didn't exist for 32 years. Now, that same son held his father's failing heart in his hands. Have you ever wondered what happens when karma doesn't just knock, but kicks down the door? What would you do if the person who hurt you the most suddenly needed you to save their life? Could you put aside decades of pain, abandonment, and unanswered questions to help someone who threw you away like you were nothing? Can you hold someone's beating heart in your hands, knowing that same person once crushed yours? Here's what I know for certain. Abandonment leaves wounds that no amount of money can heal. Some fathers choose legacy over love, inheritance over integrity, reputation over responsibility. They make that choice believing they'll never face consequences. But what happens when fate forces a reckoning that wealth cannot buy its way out of? Today, I'm going to tell you a story that will change how you think about forgiveness, redemption, and what it truly means to be a father. By the end, you'll understand why the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming someone extraordinary despite those who tried to break you. This story will make you laugh. It will make you cry. It will make you furious. But most importantly, it will remind you that your beginning does not determine your ending. Stay until the very end, because the lessons waiting for you might just transform how you see your own life. Welcome back to Mr. Roman's Story Vault. If you've been here before, you already know what we do. We deliver powerful stories with life-changing messages. Thank you for returning. If you're new here, you've just discovered something special. This channel exists to bring you narratives that entertain, inspire, and leave you thinking long after the video ends. Subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell, because you do not want to miss stories like this one. Now, let me take you back 32 years, to the streets of Philadelphia, where a chance meeting between two people from completely different worlds set into motion a chain of events that no one could have predicted. This is how it all began. Philadelphia, 1991. The city hummed with energy that particular autumn. Leaves turned copper and gold along tree-lined streets. The Schuylkill River caught reflections of city lights as evening fell, creating patterns of silver and shadow on the water's surface. This was a city of contrasts, always had been, always would be. On the main line, old money families lived in estates with manicured lawns and iron gates that had stood for generations. The Whitfields, the Cadwaladers, the Biddles, names that appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. Families whose wealth stretched back so far that no one could remember when it began. But travel 15 minutes east, and you'd find a different Philadelphia entirely. Row homes with front stoops where neighbors gathered. Corner stores where everyone knew your name. Blocks where people worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. These were communities built on grit, faith, and the unshakable belief that hard work could change your circumstances. Jovienne Sinclair lived between both worlds, though she belonged to neither. At 23 years old, she was everything the world tried to tell her she couldn't be. Smart, ambitious, determined to build a future with her own hands. She worked double shifts as a hostess at Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, where business deals were made over wine that cost more than her weekly rent. Her feet ached by hour 6 of every shift. Her smile remained bright until the last guest left, because this job wasn't just paying bills, it was funding her dreams. nursing school, every textbook, every scrub, every late-night study session fueled by cheap coffee and determination. Jovienne was going to become a nurse, and nothing would stop her. Not poverty, not exhaustion, not the voice in her head that sometimes whispered that girls like her didn't get happy endings. She had warm brown skin that seemed to glow under the restaurant's soft lighting, deep-set eyes that held an intelligence people noticed immediately. When she laughed, really laughed, the sound filled whatever room she occupied. It was the kind of laugh that made strangers smile without knowing why. Life hadn't been gentle with Jovienne. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 7 years old. One moment, she was a child with a mother who braided her hair and a father who lifted her onto his shoulders. The next, she was an orphan being raised by her grandmother in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled like lemon oil and lavender. Grandma Odell was 72 now, with hands twisted by arthritis, but a spirit that age couldn't touch. She had raised Jovienne with love, discipline, and sayings that stuck to your soul. "Baby girl," she'd say, "hardship is just life's way of showing you what you're made of. Don't you ever let it define you. You define it." Jovienne carried those words everywhere. She refused to let tragedy write her story. Yes, she'd lost her parents. Yes, she worked twice as hard as her classmates who had parents paying their tuition. Yes, there were nights she fell asleep with textbooks still open, too exhausted to even close them. But she was building something, brick by brick, shift by shift. One Friday evening in October, everything changed. Jovienne was seating guests in her usual section when the door opened, and a man walked in who looked like he belonged in the pages of a magazine. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an Italian suit that fit him so perfectly it had to be custom-made. A platinum watch caught the light at his wrist. Merritt Whitfield was 28 years old and carried the weight of a family legacy on his shoulders, whether he wanted to or not. The Whitfield name meant something in Philadelphia. Old money, real estate empires that spanned 3 states, political connections that reached into governors' mansions and congressional offices. His great-great-grandfather had built the family fortune in railroads and steel. Every generation since had multiplied it. Merritt's father was cold as January ice. His mother cared more about seating arrangements at charity galas than her own children. His older brother had fallen perfectly into line, joining the family. Business with the enthusiasm of a man walking to his own execution. But Merritt was different. At least, that's what everyone said. Where his family was rigid, he seemed flexible. Where they were calculating, he appeared warm. He'd gone to Wharton because it was expected, but he'd also volunteered at homeless shelters on weekends. He wore expensive suits, but treated service staff like human beings worth knowing. He walked into Marcello's that night expecting to meet his brother for dinner. Another obligation. Another evening of listening to Edmund drone on about quarterly earnings and acquisition strategies. He didn't expect his entire world to shift the moment his eyes met those of the hostess standing near the entrance. Jovienne looked up from her seating chart and froze. Something passed between them. Something neither could name. It wasn't just attraction, though that was certainly there. It was recognition, like their souls had been searching for each other without either of them knowing. "Good evening," she managed, her professional voice steady despite her suddenly racing heart. "Table for one?" Merritt blinked, momentarily forgetting why he'd even come. Actually, I was supposed to meet my brother, but knowing Edmund, he's probably cancelling as we speak." Right on cue, his phone buzzed. A text from his brother claiming some emergency at the office. The same excuse he always used. Merritt showed her the message with a rueful smile. "There it is. Looks like I'm dining alone after all." "I'm sorry," Jovienne said, and she meant it. There was something lonely in his eyes, despite the expensive clothes and confident bearing. "Don't be. Edmund's company is overrated anyway." He paused. "Do you have any recommendations for someone eating alone on a Friday night?" The question was simple. The way he asked it, vulnerable, genuine, like her opinion actually mattered, that was what caught her attention. "The salmon is exceptional tonight," Jovienne said, "and the corner booth has the best view of the city." "Perfect." I'll trust your judgment. She led him to the booth, acutely aware of his presence behind her. She could feel his eyes on her, though not in a way that made her uncomfortable, more like he was trying to memorize her. Yovienne seated him and returned to her station, but throughout the entire evening she felt his gaze. Every time she passed his table, he looked up. Not obviously, not in a way that made her feel objectified, just present, attentive, like she was the most interesting person in the entire restaurant. Merritt ordered the salmon. He barely tasted it. How could he focus on food when every time she walked by, the world seemed to get brighter? He watched her interact with other guests, the way she remembered their names, how she made everyone feel welcome and seen. She moved through that restaurant like someone who understood that every job worth doing was worth doing with excellence. 4 hours later, Yovienne's shift ended. She grabbed her coat from the back room, said goodbye to the kitchen, staff, and pushed through the front door into the October night. The air had that crisp quality that comes right before winter. She pulled her jacket tighter and started walking toward the bus stop. "Excuse me." Yovienne turned, and her breath caught. Merritt stood there, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate from the cafe next door. Steam rose from the cups into the cool night air. "I hope this isn't too forward," he said, extending 1 cup toward her. "But I couldn't leave without at least knowing your name." Every rational part of Jovienne's brain screamed warnings. This man was clearly wealthy. She was a hostess working her way through school. He was white. She was black. This was 1991, and while the world had made progress, some barriers remained carved in stone. His world and her world didn't intersect peacefully. They collided. She knew how this story was supposed to go: the rich man and the poor girl. The fantasy that crumbled the moment reality showed up. The heartbreak, waiting at the end of temporary infatuation. Every logical reason to walk away lined up in her mind. But then she looked into his eyes, really looked, and saw something that made her hesitate. Kindness, genuine interest, a loneliness that matched her own. Maybe, just maybe, he was worth the risk. Jovienne reached out and accepted the hot chocolate. The cup was warm against her cold fingers. "Jovienne," she said. "My name is Jovienne." Merritt smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "I'm Merritt. It's an honor to meet you, Jovienne." They stood outside that restaurant for 2 hours, talking until their hot chocolate went cold and had to be replaced. They talked about everything and nothing. Her nursing school dreams, his complicated relationship with his family, her grandmother's wisdom, his secret love of jazz music that his family considered beneath them. By the time Jovienne finally caught her bus home that night, she knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Second, she was absolutely terrified of what came next. What happened next consumed them both like wildfire. Merritt pursued Jovienne with an intensity that thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. The morning after they met, flowers arrived at the restaurant with a note written. In his own hand, "Thank you for the best conversation I've had in years. Dinner tomorrow? M." She said yes. That dinner turned into 3 more that week. Long conversations that stretched past midnight. Walks along the Benjamin Franklin Parkway where they talked about philosophy and medicine and what it meant to build a life that mattered. Within 2 weeks, Merritt had memorized Jovienne's class schedule. He started showing up at the nursing school with lunch. Sandwiches from Reading Terminal Market, still warm and wrapped carefully. At first, her classmates stared. A man like him, with his tailored clothes and luxury car, waiting for a woman like her. The whispers started immediately, but Jovienne stopped caring what anyone thought the moment she saw his face light up when she walked out of class. "You didn't have to do this," she'd say, accepting the food he brought. "I know," he'd reply. "I wanted to." They studied together in his car, overlooking the Schuylkill River. Jovienne would quiz herself on anatomy while Merritt sat in the driver seat, reading her textbook passages and testing her knowledge. When she got an answer right, he'd lean over and kiss her temple. When she got one wrong, he'd make her laugh until the frustration melted away. Their worlds collided in the most beautiful ways. Merritt took her to fundraisers where champagne was served in crystal. Glasses and orchestras played music she'd only heard on recordings. She wore dresses he bought her, though she protested every time, and he introduced her to people whose names she recognized from newspapers. She felt like Cinderella at the ball, except this prince seemed to genuinely want her there. They spent weekends at Martha's Vineyard, walking beaches where the sand was white and soft. Merritt would hold her hand and tell her about summers he'd spent there as a child, before the weight of family expectations had crushed the joy out of everything. Yovian listened and saw him, really saw him, in ways no one else had bothered to. "You're going to do great things," he told her one Saturday afternoon, as they sat on a beach blanket, her head resting on his shoulder. "I can feel it. You're going to change lives, Jovi. That's the plan," she said softly. "Help people who don't have anyone else fighting for them." He turned to look at her, something fierce and tender in his grey eyes. "You're extraordinary. Do you know that?" She wanted to believe him. But there was something they never discussed openly, something that hung between them like a curtain neither could fully pull back. They were always alone. Every date was private. Every dinner was at restaurants outside the city where no one would recognize the Whitfield name. Every trip was carefully planned to avoid people from his world. And he never, not once, mentioned taking her home to meet his family. 3 months into their relationship, Jovienne finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. "When do I get to meet them?" "Your family." Merritt's jaw tightened. They were in his downtown apartment, a place he kept separate from the family estate. The space was modern, expensive, and felt like a sanctuary from everything he'd grown up with. "It's complicated," he said, not meeting her eyes. "What's complicated about it? Either you want me to meet them or you don't." He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "My family isn't. They're not like other families, Jovi. They have expectations, rules, ways things are supposed to be done. And I don't fit those rules." It wasn't a question. He turned around, and the anguish on his face looked genuine. "Give me time, please. I need to prepare them. They're not ready yet." "Ready for what?" "Ready to accept that you're dating a black woman who works as a hostess. Ready to accept that I'm serious about someone they didn't choose for me," he said. "This has nothing to do with you. It's them. It's their prejudices and their narrow-minded view of what my life should look like." Yovienne wanted desperately to believe him. "How much time?" she asked. "I don't know. But I promise you, Jovi, I promise, I'm going to find a way to make this work. You're too important to me." She let him pull her into his arms. She let his words soothe the doubt trying to take root in her heart. She told herself that love required patience, and if Merritt needed time to bring his family around, she could give him that. Looking back, she would recognize this as the first crack in the foundation. But in the moment, wrapped in his embrace, she convinced herself that they could overcome anything. Their physical relationship deepened with every passing week. Merritt touched her like she was something precious, like every inch of her skin was worth memorizing. There were nights in his apartment when the rest of the world disappeared entirely, and all that existed was the two of them learning each other's bodies and hearts in equal measure. He whispered promises against her neck, traced futures along her spine, made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I've never felt this way about anyone," he confessed one night. His forehead pressed to hers, their breathing synchronized. "You've changed everything, Jovi. Everything I thought I knew about what I wanted from life. Tell me," she whispered back. He painted word pictures in the darkness. A house with a garden where she could grow herbs for cooking. Children with her beautiful smile and his stubborn streak. A life built on their own terms, away from the expectations and judgments of people who didn't understand what they had. "We'll have a son," he said, his hands splayed across her stomach. "And he'll be brilliant like his mother. We'll teach him that love matters more than money. That character matters more than last names." Yovienne felt her heart expand until it hurt. "You really see that? Us, a future." "I see everything with you," he said. "A whole life. You and me against the world if we have to be." She believed him. God help her. She believed every single word. The sex was good, but it was the intimacy afterward that hooked her completely. The way he held her for hours, talking about dreams and fears and all the things he'd never told anyone else. The vulnerability he showed her when the expensive suits came off and the Whitfield air facade crumbled. This was real, she told herself. Whatever doubts crept in during daylight hours melted away in these moments of connection. "I love you," he told her on a February night, snow falling outside the windows of his apartment. "I know it's fast. I know we haven't been together that long. But I love you, Jovienne Sinclair. I love you more than I've ever loved anything." "I love you too," she said, tears streaming down her face, because she meant it with every fiber of her being. They made love that night with a desperation that felt like sealing a covenant, like promising each other forever, even though neither said the word aloud. Spring came to Philadelphia in soft whispers of green and gold. Jovienne's nursing classes intensified as finals approached. Merritt supported her every step of the way, quizzing her late into the night, and bringing her coffee during study sessions that lasted until dawn. She was exhausted but happy, tired but hopeful, stressed about exams but certain that she had found something rare and worth protecting. Then in early April, her body started sending signals she couldn't ignore. Exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, nausea that hit at odd hours, breasts tender in ways they'd never been before. At first, she blamed stress. Finals did terrible things to the body, she reasoned. She was just run down. But when her period didn't come, fear and hope collided in her chest. Jovienne bought a pregnancy test from a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods away where no one knew her. She took it in the bathroom at her grandmother's apartment while Grandma Odell was at church. 2 pink lines appeared before she'd even finished counting the seconds. Pregnant. She sat on the bathroom floor, test still in her trembling hands, and felt her entire world shift on its axis. Terror crashed over her first. She was 23 years old, still in nursing school, working 2 jobs just to survive. How could she afford a baby? How could she finish school? What would her grandmother say? But then, slowly, hope began to push through the fear like spring flowers through snow. This baby was part of her and Merritt, physical proof of the love they shared. Maybe this was exactly what they needed, the bridge that would finally force him to stop hiding their relationship. Surely a child would make him stand up to his family. Surely becoming a father would give him the courage to choose her publicly instead of just privately. A baby would change everything. He told her he wanted children with her. He'd described a son with her smile. He'd made promises about a future built together. This baby would make those promises real. Jovienne placed a hand on her still flat stomach and made a decision. She would tell him tonight. She'd go to his apartment and share the news that would transform their lives. Yes, it was earlier than they'd planned. Yes, there would be challenges, but they loved each other. That was enough. Love would conquer all. She held onto that belief like a lifeline as she called him and asked to come over, as she rehearsed the words she'd say, as she prepared for a conversation that would determine the rest of her life. Jovienne had no idea that the man she loved was about to break her in ways she didn't know a person could break. Jovienne arrived at Merritt's apartment just after 7 that evening. Her hands hadn't stopped trembling since she'd seen those 2 pink lines. She'd changed clothes 3 times, unable to decide what you're supposed to wear. When telling the man you love that your lives are about to change forever, she'd settled on jeans and a simple sweater, nothing fancy, nothing that felt like she was trying too hard. The pregnancy test was in her purse, physical proof if he needed it, though she prayed he wouldn't doubt her. Merritt answered the door with a smile that made her heart ache. He was still in his work clothes, dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled. In that way, that made him look more human and less like the polished air everyone expected him to be. "Hey, beautiful," he said, pulling her inside and kissing her forehead. "I was just thinking about you. Were you—" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Always." He led her to the couch, that same couch where they'd spent countless nights tangled together, talking until sunrise. "You sounded serious on the phone. Everything okay?" Jovienne sat down, her hands folded in her lap to stop them from shaking. This was it. The moment that would define everything that came next. I need to tell you something. Merritt sat beside her, concern creasing his forehead. You're scaring me, Jovi. What's wrong? She took a deep breath and looked directly into his grey eyes. Those eyes she'd come to love, those eyes she hoped their child might inherit. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them. 8 weeks, she continued when he didn't respond. I took 3 tests to be sure. They were all positive. She watched his face, waiting for the smile she'd imagined, waiting for him to pull her into his arms and tell her everything would be okay, waiting for the man who'd promised her children with her smile to be excited about the fact that promise was becoming real. None of that happened. Instead, she watched something die in his eyes. The warmth drained out of them first, like someone had opened a valve and let all the softness pour out until nothing remained but cold grey stone. His jaw hardened into a line she'd never seen before. The muscles in his neck tensed. His entire body went rigid. The man she loved disappeared right in front of her. In his place sat someone wearing Merritt's face, but operating with an entirely different soul. Are you certain? His voice was flat, emotionless. The voice he probably used in boardrooms when discussing quarterly reports. Yes, I'm certain. A silence fell between them that felt like falling into ice water. Jovien's heart started hammering against her ribs. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. This wasn't the reaction she'd prepared for. Merritt? She said softly. Say something. He stood abruptly, turning away from her. His hands went to his hips. She could see his chest rising and falling with deliberate breaths, like he was trying to control something inside himself. This complicates things, Jovien. The sentence landed like a slap. Complicates things? She stood too, shock giving way to confusion. Merritt, this is our child, our baby. How is that a complication? He walked to the window overlooking the city, the same window where he'd once held her while describing their future together. When he turned back around, the transformation was complete. The man standing before her was not the man who'd made love to her with whispered promises. This was Merritt Whitfield, heir to a fortune, member of a family whose name opened doors across 3 states. This was the man who understood that some things mattered more than love, legacy, reputation, inheritance. My family will never accept this, he said, each word carefully chosen. Do you understand what you're asking me to give up? Jovien felt her world tilting. I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm telling you we're having a baby they'll never accept. A child that will cost me everything I've worked for. He started pacing, his mind clearly calculating outcomes and consequences. My inheritance, my position in the company, my entire future. She listened to him list the things he valued, waiting, desperately waiting, for him to mention her, to mention the baby, to say something that indicated they mattered at all in this equation. He never did. What about us? Jovien's voice cracked. What about all the things you promised me? The house with the garden, the children you said you wanted? Was all of that a lie? It was different when it was theoretical, he said, still not looking at her. When it was someday. Not now. Not like this. Not like what? Not with me. The truth was dawning on her like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. You never intended to actually be with me, did you? Not publicly. Not in a way that mattered. That's not fair. Isn't I to... Her voice rose, anger finally breaking through the shock. 6 months, Merritt. 6 months of you promising me a future while keeping me hidden like I was something shameful. And now, when I need you most, when our child needs you, don't. His voice cut like a knife. Don't manipulate me with emotional appeals. Jovien stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time. Who are you? Because the man I fell in love with wouldn't be talking about his unborn child like it's a problem to be solved. Merritt went to his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a folder, like he'd been expecting this, like he'd already prepared for this exact scenario. Her blood ran cold. I'm going to take care of this, he said, his voice businesslike. Professional. I'll give you a substantial sum of money. Enough to cover everything: medical expenses, an apartment across town, childcare, education, everything the child could possibly need. Everything except a father, Jovian whispered. There are conditions, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. You'll sign documents agreeing never to reveal my identity as the father. You'll never contact me or my family. In exchange, you'll be financially secure. You can finish nursing school. The child will want for nothing materially. He slid the paperwork across the coffee table toward her. Jovian looked down at the documents, already prepared, already typed up, already approved by whatever lawyer he'd consulted. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was calculated, planned. He'd known exactly what he would do if this moment ever came. This is for the best, Merritt said, his tone almost gentle, like he was explaining something to a child who didn't understand. You'll be taken care of financially. That's more than most women in your situation could hope for. My situation? She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. You mean pregnant by a coward? His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. I'm not asking for money, Merritt. I'm asking you to be a father. I'm asking you to love us. Her voice broke completely. I'm asking you to be the man you pretended to be. The silence that followed had weight to it. Physical mass. It pressed down on Jovian's chest until she could barely breathe. She stood there, waiting for him to say something, anything, that would indicate the man she loved was still in there somewhere. But Merritt just stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of cool determination. That silence was his answer. Jovian looked down at the papers again. At the dollar amount, more money than she'd seen in 5 years of working. At the legal language designed to erase Merritt from their child's life as cleanly as a signature on a line. At the reduction of their love to a transaction. I won't sign this, she said quietly. Jovian, be reasonable. No. She stood, her legs shaking, but her voice growing stronger. I won't sign away my child's right to know where they come from. I won't sign away their father because you're too much of a coward to stand up to your family. You're making a mistake. His voice held a warning now. Without my financial support, I don't want your money. Jovian grabbed her purse, the pregnancy test still inside like a talisman of everything this night had destroyed. I want you to be a man of your word. But clearly that's not possible. She walked toward the door, each step feeling like moving through water. Jovian, wait. She paused, hand on the doorknob, hope flickering one last foolish time. I'm sorry, Jovi. For just a moment she heard him in there, the real Merritt, the one she'd fallen in love with. She heard regret. She heard pain. She heard the sound of a man at war with himself. But when she turned to look at him, his face was already hardening again. The moment of vulnerability disappeared like it had never existed. I'm sorry, he repeated, but this is the way it has to be. The hope died. You're right about one thing, Jovian said, her hand tightening on the doorknob. You are sorry. The sorriest excuse for a man I've ever met. She pulled the door open. You'll regret this, Merritt called after her. Without my help. Jovian turned one last time, her hand braced against the doorframe. Tears streaming down her face, but her spine straight and strong. No, Merritt. One day you will. She walked out and let the door close behind her. The sound of that door shutting echoed through the hallway. Final. Absolute. The end of one chapter and the beginning of another, written in tears and determination. Jovian made it to the elevator before the sobs came. She made it to the lobby before her legs nearly gave out. She made it to the street before she had to stop and brace herself, against a lamppost, crying so hard she couldn't catch her breath. But even through the devastation, even through the heartbreak that felt like it might actually kill her, one truth remained crystal clear. She'd walked out of that apartment with nothing but her dignity and the life growing inside her. She'd refused to be bought. She'd refused to let her child be erased. She'd chosen the harder path, the path of single motherhood and struggle, and nights she'd cry herself to sleep, wondering if she'd made the right choice. But she'd also chosen integrity over comfort, truth over money, love over convenience. Merritt Whitfield had shown her exactly who he was when it mattered most. A man who valued his inheritance more than his child. A man who would rather pay to make a problem disappear than fight for the woman he claimed to love. A coward wrapped in expensive suits and empty promises. Jovienne walked to the bus stop with her head held high despite the tears. She rode home with one hand pressed protectively over her stomach. She climbed the stairs to her grandmother's apartment, knowing everything had changed. The man she loved was gone, but the child she already loved more than life itself was still here. And that, she told herself, would have to be enough. And in that moment, Jovienne made a choice that would define not just her life, but the life of her unborn child. A choice to refuse being bought. A choice to walk away with nothing but her integrity and the belief that her baby deserved better than a father who could be negotiated out of their life. If this story is touching your heart, I need you to hit that like button right now. That like tells the algorithm that this story matters, and it helps us reach more people who need to hear it. Trust me, you're going to want to see what happens next. This story is far from over. Jovienne cried for 3 days straight. She returned to her grandmother's apartment that night with mascara streaking her face and her heart shattered into pieces she wasn't sure could ever be reassembled. She walked through the door and saw Grandma Odell sitting in her favorite chair, the one with the worn armrest where she'd rubbed her hand for 20 years and completely fell apart. "He doesn't want us," Jovienne sobbed, collapsing at her grandmother's feet. "He doesn't want our baby." Grandma Odell was 72 years old. Arthritis had twisted her fingers into knots that made simple tasks painful. Her knees ached when it rained. Her back protested every morning when she rose from bed, but her arms were still strong enough to hold her granddaughter. She pulled Jovienne up into her lap like she was 7 years old again, freshly orphaned and broken. She stroked her hair and let her cry until there were no tears left, until Jovienne's breathing turned ragged and exhausted. "Baby girl," Grandma Odell said softly, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom earned through. 72 years of living, some men ain't got the backbone to match their blessings. Jovienne hiccuped, her face pressed against her grandmother's shoulder. "That man had a chance at something real," Grandma Odell continued, "and he chose money over love, fear over faith, comfort over courage. That ain't got nothing to do with you or that baby you're carrying. That's all him." "But what am I going to do?" Jovienne whispered. "I'm still in school. I work 2 jobs and can barely afford rent. How am I supposed to raise a child alone?" Grandma Odell pulled back and cupped Jovienne's face in her gnarled hands, forcing her granddaughter to meet her eyes. "You listen to me. That child you carrying, that child is going to be your greatest gift. You watch and see. The blessings that come wrapped in struggle are the ones that change us into who we're meant to be." "I'm scared, Grandma." "I know, baby, but scared don't mean incapable. You're stronger than you know, and you ain't alone. You got me, you got the Lord, and you got a spirit inside you that don't know how to quit." Jovienne wanted to believe her. In that moment, sobbing in her grandmother's arms with a baby growing inside her and a future full of uncertainty, she wasn't sure she could. But Grandma Odell had never lied to her, not once in 23 years. So Jovienne chose to hold on to her grandmother's words like a lifeline, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. Tavion Mercer Sinclair was born on October 15, 1992, at 6:47 in the morning. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, 20 inches long. A perfect baby boy who came into the world screaming his displeasure at the brightness and cold. The moment the nurse placed him in Jovienne's arms, everything changed. She looked down at his tiny face, eyes squeezed shut, fists waving furiously, mouth open in protest, and felt a love so fierce it nearly stopped her heart. "Hi, baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mama, and I promise you, I'm going to give you the world." Tavion had her warm brown complexion, skin so soft it felt like touching a miracle. He had her nose and her chin. But when he finally opened his eyes 3 hours later, Jovienne's breath caught. Grey eyes, sterling grey, like storm clouds before rain. Whitfield grey. For just a moment, Grief threatened to overwhelm the joy. Those eyes would forever remind her of the man who'd abandoned them both. But as she stared into her son's face, watching him look back at her with that unfocused newborn gaze, she made a decision. Those eyes didn't belong to Merritt. They belonged to Tavion. And everything about this child, every feature, every breath, every moment of his life, would be defined by love, not abandonment. She'd chosen his first name carefully. Tavion meant son of David, the biblical king who'd risen from shepherd boy to ruler despite impossible odds. His middle name, Mercer, came from her own father, the man who'd loved her fiercely for 7 short years before a car accident stole him away. Tavion Mercer Sinclair would carry the legacy of love and strength, not the weakness of the man who'd refused to claim him. Grandma Odell came to the hospital and held her great-grandson with tears rolling down her weathered cheeks. "Look at you," she cooed, rocking him gently, already changing the world just by being in it. "You're going to do great things, little man. I can feel it in my bones." Yovian watched her grandmother with her son and felt something shift inside her chest. Yes, the road ahead would be hard. Yes, she was terrified. But looking at the two of them together, past and future connected, in that hospital room, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The next 3 years were the hardest of Yovien's life. She finished nursing school through sheer force of will. Grandma Odell watched Tavion during the day while Jovien attended classes. At night, Jovien worked shifts at the hospital, first as a nursing assistant, then as a licensed practical nurse once she passed her boards. She survived on coffee, prayer, and maybe 4 hours of sleep on good nights. There were moments when exhaustion nearly defeated her, nights when she'd come home at 2 in the morning, so tired she could barely think, only to find Tavion awake and crying with colic. She'd walk him around that tiny apartment, bouncing him gently and singing songs through her own tears. There were mornings when her alarm went off after 3 hours of sleep, and she'd lie there wondering if she could survive another day. There were weeks when money was so tight she'd skip meals to make sure Tavion had everything he needed. And yes, there were moments when she thought about that paperwork Merritt had offered. The substantial sum that would have made everything easier. The apartment across town. The financial security. Doubt would creep in during those 3 a.m. feeding sessions. Had she been foolish to refuse his money? Was her pride worth this struggle? But every single time that doubt threatened to take root, something would happen to wash it away. Tavion would smile at her. A real smile, not just gas. And her heart would melt. She'd come home exhausted and find him sleeping peacefully, his small chest, rising and falling, and realize she'd never seen anything more beautiful. He'd reach for her when she walked in the door, his whole face lighting up, and she'd know with absolute certainty every struggle was worth it. Every single one. Tavion was brilliant from the beginning. At 2 years old, he could identify all his colors and count to 20. At 3, he was speaking in complete sentences that made adults do double takes. By 4, he was reading simple books on his own, sounding out words with his small finger tracing the letters. Jovien would find him curled up with books about space, about animals, about how the human body worked. His curiosity was insatiable. "Mama, why does the heart beat?" he asked one evening when he was 5 years old. She'd just gotten home from a double shift and was so tired she could barely stand. But she sat down beside him and explained cardiac function in terms a 5-year-old could understand. His eyes went wide with wonder. "That's amazing. Hearts keep us alive." "They do, baby. When I grow up, I want to help hearts," he declared. "Like you help people." By age 6, Tavion was excelling in mathematics, solving problems that challenged kids twice his age. His teachers called Jovien in for conferences, amazed by his abilities. "He's gifted," they told her. "He should be in advanced programs." Jovien worked extra shifts to afford the testing and enrollment fees. She'd sacrifice anything to give her son opportunities she'd never had. When Tavion was 10 years old, he made an announcement that would shape the rest of his life. Jovien had just come home from an especially brutal shift at the hospital. A patient had coded on her watch. They'd gotten him back, but it had taken everything out of her. She walked through the door and collapsed on the couch, still in her scrubs, too exhausted to even change. Tavion brought her a glass of water without being asked. "Mama, are you okay?" "Just tired, baby. Long day." He sat beside her, studying her face with those grey eyes that always seemed to see more than they should. "You save people," he said quietly. "Every day, you go to work and save people's lives." "I try my best. I want to be like you when I grow up," Tavion said. "I want to help people, but I want to do even more. I want to be a doctor." Yovien's eyes filled with tears, the good kind this time. She pulled him close, breathing in the scent of the boy who'd become her entire world. "Then you work hard, baby," she said, cupping his face the same way Grandma Odell had cupped hers years ago. "You study. You never let anyone tell you that you can't do something because of where you come from or what you look like. You hear me?" "Yes, Mama." She took his small hands in hers, holding them tight. "Your beginning doesn't determine your ending, Tavion. Remember that. You came into this world under hard circumstances, but that doesn't define who you get to become. You understand?" He nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "I understand." He never forgot those words. The question came when Tavion was 12 years old. They were having dinner, spaghetti, his favorite, when he set down his fork and looked at Yovien with an expression that made her heart stop. "Mama, who's my father?" She'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed answers in her head hundreds of times. But now that it was here, every planned response disappeared. "Your father was a man I loved very much," she said carefully, her throat tight. "But he wasn't ready to be the man we needed him to be. He chose a different path." Tavion absorbed this, his 12-year-old mind processing information that would hurt anyone at any age. Did he know about me? The question pierced her heart like a knife. She could have lied, could have told him that Merritt never knew, sparing him the pain of knowing his father had made an active choice to abandon him. But Yovien had built their relationship on truth. "Yes, baby." He knew. Tavion nodded slowly. She watched emotions flicker across his face. Hurt, confusion, anger, resignation, before he settled into a calm that broke her heart. "Then he missed out," Tavion said quietly. "He did," Yovien agreed, tears streaming down her face. "He missed out on the most incredible person I've ever known." From that day forward, Tavion rarely asked about his father, but Yovien knew the wound was there. She saw it sometimes when he watched his friends with their dads at school events. She felt it in the questions he never asked, the gaps he never tried to fill. The questions he didn't voice were louder than the ones he did. Why wasn't I enough? What's wrong with me that my own father didn't want me? Would I have been different if he'd stayed? Yovien tried to fill those gaps with twice the love. She showed up to every school event, every science fair, every basketball game, even when she had to trade shifts to do it. She made sure Tavion knew every single day that he was wanted, valued, loved beyond measure. But she couldn't erase the absence. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't give him the one thing he'd never say he wanted, but she knew he needed. A father who'd chosen to stay. So instead, she did what she'd always done. She loved him fiercely. She raised him with wisdom and strength. She taught him that his worth wasn't determined by who'd abandoned him, but by who he chose to become. And Tavion, beautiful, brilliant, wounded Tavion, took those lessons and built himself into someone extraordinary. Not because of Merritt Whitfield, but in spite of him. Tavion Sinclair graduated from high school as valedictorian. He stood on that stage in his cap and gown, delivering a speech about perseverance and the power of those who refuse to quit, and Yovien wept in the audience. Grandma Odell sat beside her, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, whispering, "Thank you, Jesus," under her breath. This boy, this young man, had defied every statistic that said children from single-parent households couldn't achieve greatness. He'd earned a perfect 4 GPA while working part-time at the library. He'd served as president of the science club, captain of the debate team, and volunteered at the same hospital where his mother worked. And now he was heading to Johns Hopkins University on a full academic scholarship. You did it, baby, Jovienne told him after the ceremony, holding his face in her hands the way she'd done since he was small. You did it. We did it, Mama, Tavion corrected, pulling her into a hug. None of this happens without you. 4 years later, he graduated summa cum laude with a degree in biology. 4 years after that, he earned his medical degree, again from Johns Hopkins, and matched into their prestigious cardiology residency program. Dr. Tavion Sinclair. The title felt like vindication, like proof that his beginning hadn't determined his ending, just like his mother had promised. By age 32, Tavion had become one of the youngest attending physicians in the cardiology department at Philadelphia's most renowned hospital, the same institution where his mother had worked as a nurse for decades. His reputation for excellence preceded him everywhere he went. Patients requested him specifically. Other doctors sought his consultation on complicated cases. He had a gift for explaining complex cardiac issues in ways people could understand, and a bedside manner that made scared patients feel safe. You have your mother's heart, one elderly patient told him after he'd successfully performed a triple bypass. Not just skill, son, compassion. That can't be taught. Tavion thought about that often. How much of who he was came from Jovienne's tireless example. How much of his drive came from watching her work double shifts and still show up to every school event. How much of his compassion came from seeing her treat every patient with dignity, regardless of whether they could pay. Everything good in him, he knew, came from her. The other half of his DNA, the Whitfield half, had contributed nothing but grey eyes and a wound he'd learned to work around. When Tavion was 15, Jovienne met a man named Curtis at a hospital fundraiser. Curtis Matthews was a high school principal with kind eyes and a gentle spirit. He was 50 years old, a widower who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years prior. He had no children of his own, but he'd spent 30 years shaping young minds with patience and wisdom. He asked Jovienne to coffee, then dinner, then a walk along the same river where she'd once studied with a man who'd promised her the world and delivered abandonment. But Curtis was different. He didn't promise her anything except honesty and presence. He didn't hide her or make excuses about family expectations. When he introduced her to his friends, he did so with pride. When he met Tavion, he treated the teenager with genuine respect. "Your mother tells me you want to be a doctor," Curtis said during their first meeting. "Yes, sir," Tavion replied, naturally wary of any man entering his mother's life. "That's ambitious. What kind of doctor?" "Cardiologist." "I want to fix hearts." Curtis smiled. "The world needs more of that." Hearts breaking and hearts stopping. Both kinds need fixing. It was a simple exchange, but it marked the beginning of something neither Tavion nor Curtis expected, a real relationship. Curtis never tried to replace the father Tavion had never known. He simply showed up. He attended Tavion's science fairs and debate competitions. He helped him prepare for SATs. He taught him how to tie a proper tie before prom and how to change a tire when Tavion got his first car. He chose to be present in Tavion's life, day after ordinary day. 3 years after they met, Curtis asked Jovienne to marry him. She said yes. Their wedding was small and beautiful, held in the backyard of Grandma Odell's house with close friends and family. Jovienne wore a simple cream dress that made her look like she was glowing. Curtis cried when he saw her. Tavion walked his mother down the aisle. At 18 years old, he gave her away to a man who'd earned the right to stand beside her. The marriage was quiet and peaceful, everything Jovienne's relationship with Merritt had not been. Curtis woke up every morning and made coffee for his wife. He rubbed her feet after long shifts at the hospital. He listened when she talked about her day and remembered the small details that mattered. He knew about Tavion's biological father. Jovienne had told him early in their relationship, refusing to build something on secrets. "Does it bother you?" she'd asked. "That I have a son with someone else? That his father is a fool?" Curtis had interrupted gently. "Any man who walks away from a woman like you and a son like Tavion is a fool. And no, it doesn't bother me. That man's loss is my gain." He meant it. One evening, when Tavion was home from college during winter break, Curtis found him studying at the kitchen table. He sat down across from him with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Can I tell you something?" Curtis asked. Tavion looked up from his anatomy textbook. "Sure. Being your stepfather has been one of the greatest privileges of my life." Tavion blinked, caught off guard by the sudden vulnerability. Curtis continued, his hand wrapped around his mug. "I never got to have children of my own. My wife and I tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. When I met your mother and got to know you, I thought maybe God was giving me a second chance." "Curtis, let me finish." He smiled. "You didn't have to accept me. You could have resented me for coming into your lives. But you gave me a chance. You let me be part of your journey, and I want you to know, blood doesn't make a father. Choice does. Showing up does. And any fool who walks away from a son like you doesn't deserve to call himself a father." He reached across the table and patted Tavion's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, son. Not because of your grades or your scholarships or your plans to be a doctor, though those things are remarkable. I'm proud of who you are as a person, your character, your heart, the way you treat people. That's what matters." Tavion felt tears building behind his eyes. "Thank you. For everything you've done for us, for Mom, for me. Thank you for letting me," Curtis said simply. That conversation stayed with Tavion through medical school, through residency, through every difficult moment when he wondered if he was enough. Curtis had shown him what true fatherhood looked like. It wasn't about genetics or last names or bank accounts. It was about showing up, day after day, year after year, choosing to love someone not because you had to, but because you wanted to. While Tavion was building a life of purpose and meaning, Merritt Whitfield was building an empire that felt increasingly hollow. After abandoning Yovian, Merritt had done exactly what was expected of him. He'd married within his social circle a woman named Patricia from another wealthy family. Their union was practical, strategic, and completely devoid of passion. Patricia was beautiful in a cold, polished way. She knew how to host dinner parties and make appropriate conversation at fundraisers. She understood that their marriage was a merger of families and fortunes, not a romance. They lived together in the Whitfield estate like well-mannered strangers. No children came from their union. Merritt told himself he didn't mind. Patricia certainly didn't seem to care. They existed in parallel lives that occasionally intersected at social obligations. After 12 joyless years, Patricia asked for a divorce. Merritt agreed without argument. She took her settlement and moved to Boston. He stayed in Philadelphia and threw himself into the family business with renewed intensity. Merritt took over as CEO of Whitfield Industries when his father retired. He was brilliant at what he did, expanding their real estate holdings, making strategic acquisitions, multiplying their already substantial fortune tenfold. By his 60s, Merritt Whitfield was one of the wealthiest men on the East Coast. His name appeared on buildings. Governors took his calls. He wielded power that most people couldn't comprehend. But success came with consequences he hadn't anticipated. Running an empire required 18-hour days and constant stress, board meetings, acquisitions, negotiations. Every decision carried weight. Every mistake cost millions. The pressure was relentless. Merritt coped the way wealthy men often do: rich foods, expensive wine, minimal exercise, and the arrogant assumption that money could fix anything, including a failing body. His doctor warned him at his annual physical, "Your blood pressure is dangerously high. Your cholesterol is through the roof. You're overweight and showing early signs of arterial blockage. You need to make changes, Merritt. Serious changes." "I'll get to it," Merritt said dismissively. He never did. Another doctor, 2 years later, "You're heading for a heart attack if you don't modify your lifestyle." This isn't a suggestion anymore. It's a medical necessity. Merritt nodded and ignored the advice. He'd always been good at ignoring warnings. The stress continued. The rich dinners continued. His arteries continued hardening while his wealth continued growing. He told himself he was fine, that he was too busy to worry about health, that he'd deal with it later. But the human body doesn't care about net worth. By his early 60s, Merritt looked like a man living on borrowed time. His face had taken on a greyish pallor. His breathing came harder after minimal exertion. His heart struggled under the weight of decades of neglect. He lived alone in a mansion filled with expensive things and crushing loneliness. At night, in rare moments of honesty, Merritt would sometimes think about the woman he'd abandoned and the child he'd never met. He'd wonder what became of them. If they were happy, if the baby, a boy or girl he'd never known, ever thought about him. But he'd learned to push those thoughts away quickly. Regret was an indulgence he couldn't afford. So he pushed forward, building wealth while his body crumbled, accumulating power while his heart failed. 2 men, 2 paths. One had chosen healing, one had chosen wealth. One had built his life on love and service. One had built his life on fear and accumulation. One spent his days saving hearts. One spent his days ignoring his own heart's warnings. Dr. Tavion Sinclair and Merritt Whitfield existed in the same city sometimes, passing within blocks of each other, neither knowing how connected they were, neither knowing that fate was quietly arranging its pieces for a collision that would change everything. Christmas was coming, and with it, a reckoning 3 decades in the making. The Whitfield Foundation's annual Christmas Gala was the kind of event that defined Philadelphia's social calendar. For 37 consecutive years, the city's most powerful figures had gathered in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton to celebrate the holiday season while writing checks that would fund charitable causes for the coming year. Politicians rubbed shoulders with celebrities. Business moguls made deals over champagne. Society wives competed to see who could wear the most expensive gown while maintaining an air of effortless elegance. This year's gala promised to be particularly spectacular. The ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland that cost more than most people's annual salaries. A 20-foot Christmas tree dominated one corner, decorated with thousands of white lights and handcrafted silver ornaments that caught the glow of crystal chandeliers. Garlands of fresh evergreen and white roses draped every surface. 500 guests would dine on lobster and prime rib, while a string quartet played classical arrangements of holiday songs. The guest list read like a who's who of East Coast power brokers, senators, judges, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, 3 former governors, the mayor and half his cabinet. Anyone who mattered in Philadelphia or wanted to matter would be there. But this year carried special significance for one particular group of attendees. Philadelphia General Hospital had been selected as the foundation's featured charity partner. The Whitfield Foundation was making a 7-figure donation to the hospital's cardiac research program, funding that would support groundbreaking studies on heart disease prevention and treatment. As part of the partnership agreement, several doctors from the cardiology department were expected to attend as representatives, available to discuss their research with potential future donors. Dr. Tavion Sinclair almost didn't go. He stood in his apartment on Christmas Eve afternoon, staring at the formal invitation that had been sitting on his kitchen counter for 3 weeks. The idea of spending his evening making small talk with wealthy strangers held absolutely zero appeal. Tavion preferred spending his rare free nights catching up on medical journals or visiting his mother and Curtis. He could think of a dozen better ways to spend Christmas Eve than rubbing elbows with people who saw him as either an inspiration story or an interesting diversity addition to their guest list. "I don't belong at that kind of event," he'd told Dr. Hammond, his department head, during their last staff meeting. "That's exactly why you need to be there," Dr. Hammond had replied. "These people need to see that excellence comes in many forms. Besides, their donation is funding your research project. You owe them a handshake and a thank you." Dr. Hammond had a point, but that didn't make Tavion any more enthusiastic about the prospect. His phone rang as he was considering whether he could claim a sudden illness. "You're going," Jovienne said without preamble when he answered. "How did you?" "Because I know my son, and I know you're standing there trying to talk yourself out of it." Her voice carried that tone that had gotten him through homework assignments and teenage rebellion. "You worked too hard to get where you are to hide in your apartment when people want to celebrate your achievements." "It's not about celebrating my achievements, Mama. It's about being displayed like a trophy. Then don't be a trophy, she said simply. Be yourself. Be the brilliant, compassionate doctor you've become. Show them that excellence doesn't have to come with a trust fund. Tavion smiled despite himself. You're not going to let me skip this, are you? Not a chance. Now, put on that navy suit I bought you and go represent. The navy suit was hanging in his closet, perfectly tailored, purchased by Yovien for his birthday last year, despite his protests about the cost. She'd insisted every doctor needed at least one suit that made him feel powerful. An hour later, Tavion stood before his mirror, adjusting his tie and hoping he looked like he belonged at a billionaire's Christmas party. The Ritz-Carlton's ballroom took Tavion's breath away. He'd seen elegant venues during medical school fundraisers, but nothing compared to this level of opulence. The crystal chandeliers cast golden light that made everything glow. The Christmas tree was so tall it nearly touched the 30-foot ceiling. Servers in white gloves circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more per piece than Tavion's lunch budget for a week. He felt distinctly out of place, not because of his clothing, the navy suit looked perfect, but because of the effortless way everyone else moved through this world. These people had been attending events like this since childhood. They knew which fork to use for which course without thinking. They made conversation about ski trips to Switzerland and summer homes in the Hamptons like they were discussing the weather. Tavion grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing server and found himself gravitating toward the other hospital representatives. At least with them, he could discuss cardiac ablation techniques instead of pretending to care about yacht races. Dr. Sarah Chen from the emergency department greeted him with obvious relief. Thank God you came. I've been talking to a real estate heiress for 20 minutes about her poodle's heart murmur. Did you recommend a veterinary cardiologist? Tavion asked with a straight face. I was getting there. She laughed. How long do we have to stay before it's considered polite to leave? At least until after dinner. Hospital policy. They were making small talk with a group of hospital administrators when a hush fell over the ballroom. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the main entrance. Even the string quartet seemed to play more softly. Tavion turned to see what had captured everyone's attention. Merritt Whitfield was making his entrance. At 56, the billionaire was still an imposing figure despite the obvious toll recent years had taken. He stood just over 6 feet tall, his shoulders still broad beneath. A custom tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's cars. His hair had gone completely silver, styled in a way that suggested distinguished authority rather than advancing age. But there were signs that worried Tavion's trained medical eye. The stress lines around Merritt's eyes ran deeper than they should for a man his age. His face carried a grey pallor that had nothing to do with the ballroom's lighting. When he walked, there was something slightly labored in his breathing. Subtle, but noticeable to someone who spent his days diagnosing cardiac conditions. That man doesn't look well, Tavion thought automatically. He watched as Merritt worked the room with practiced ease, moving from group to group, with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades navigating social obligations. Politicians stepped forward to shake his hand. Business leaders angled for his attention. Society wives smiled their brightest smiles when he acknowledged them. But something about the performance felt hollow. Merritt smiled at all the right moments, laughed at appropriate intervals, and made conversation that kept people engaged. Yet there was something empty behind his eyes. Something that suggested he was going through motions rather than genuinely enjoying himself. Despite the wealth and power that surrounded him like an invisible shield, Merritt Whitfield looked profoundly lonely. Tavion felt an unexpected pang of something he couldn't identify. Not sympathy exactly. He knew nothing about this man except his reputation for business success and charitable giving. But there was something in Merritt's demeanor that triggered a recognition Tavion couldn't explain. This was a man who had everything money could buy and somehow still seemed to have nothing at all. That's our benefactor, Dr. Chen murmured beside him. Quite the presence, isn't he? He looks exhausted, Tavion observed. I'm sure running a billion-dollar empire requires stamina. She paused, studying Merritt more carefully. although now that you mention it, he does seem a bit off, less energetic than usual. Tavion continued watching as Merritt made his way through the crowd. The man was clearly skilled at this type of event. He knew how long to spend with each group, which questions to ask to keep conversations flowing, when to excuse himself gracefully. But there was something mechanical about it all. Like an actor who'd performed the same role so many times, he could do it in his sleep. An hour into the event, the lights dimmed slightly, and a podium was wheeled to the front of the ballroom. The string quartet finished their current piece and began playing more softly. Servers stepped aside as guests naturally gravitated toward the front of the room. It was time for the evening's main event, Merritt Whitfield's annual address. This speech was legendary among Philadelphia's elite. Every year, Merritt spoke about philanthropy, about the responsibility that came with wealth, about the Whitfield family's commitment to improving their community. His words were always eloquent, inspiring, and perfectly calibrated to encourage maximum charitable giving from his guests. Tonight's speech would focus on the importance of medical research and the life-saving work being done at Philadelphia General Hospital. Now, I need you to pay very close attention to what happens next, because what you're about to witness is the moment that changed everything. The moment when decades of abandonment, pain, and questions came crashing together in the most unexpected way possible. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because stories like this one, they don't come around every day, and trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Merritt walked to the podium with measured steps. The applause was thunderous, 500 of Philadelphia's most powerful people acknowledging one of their own. He raised his hand slightly, and the applause died immediately. Such was his presence in this room. "Good evening, friends," Merritt began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. "Welcome to our 37th annual Christmas Gala." More applause. Merritt smiled, but Tavion noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the holiday season, but our continued commitment to making Philadelphia a better place for all its residents." Merritt's voice was strong, practiced, commanding. For 37 years, this foundation has been privileged to support causes that matter. Education, healthcare, community development, and scientific research that saves lives. He gestured toward where the hospital representatives stood. "This year, we're particularly excited to partner with Philadelphia General Hospital's cardiac research program. The work being done by their doctors represents the cutting edge of medical science. Their research into heart disease prevention and treatment will save countless lives in the years to come." Tavion found himself studying Merritt more intently. There was something familiar about his mannerisms, though Tavion couldn't place what it was. The way he held his shoulders, the gesture he made with his left hand when emphasizing a point, the slight tilt of his head when he paused for applause. The Whitfield family has always believed that true success isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we give back, Merritt continued. "My grandfather started this foundation with a simple philosophy. Those who have been blessed with abundance have a responsibility to share those blessings." As he spoke, Merritt's breathing seemed to become slightly more labored. He paused more frequently than seemed natural for someone accustomed to public speaking. A thin sheen of perspiration appeared on his forehead, despite the ballroom's comfortable temperature. Tavion's medical instincts went on high alert. "Tonight, I'm proud to announce that the Whitfield Foundation will be donating $2 million to support cardiac research at Philadelphia General Hospital." The applause was deafening, but Merritt seemed to sway slightly as it washed over him. He gripped the podium with his left hand, his knuckles going white. His right hand moved almost unconsciously to his chest. "This funding will support groundbreaking studies into—" Merritt stopped mid-sentence, blinking rapidly. His face had gone from grey to ashen. "I apologize. I'm feeling a bit—" The words slurred. His grip on the podium tightened. Several people in the front row noticed something was wrong. Whispers started spreading through the crowd. Merritt tried to continue speaking, but his voice came out weak and confused. "The research will help us understand." His right hand pressed harder against his chest. His breathing became visibly labored. The color drained completely from his face. "I need to," he began, then stopped entirely. For a moment, he simply stood there, gripping the podium and breathing heavily, while 500 people watched in growing alarm. Then, without warning, Merritt Whitfield collapsed. He went down hard, his body hitting the floor beside the podium with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Someone screamed. People stumbled backward, unsure what to do or how to help. Chaos erupted. Security guards rushed forward, but had no medical training. Guests pressed closer, trying to see what had happened, while simultaneously backing away in horror. Cell phones appeared as people called 911. Voices rose in panic and confusion. But one voice cut through all of it. "I'm a doctor. Let me through." Tavion was already moving, pushing through the crowd with the authority of someone who had spent years in emergency situations. People parted in front of him as he made his way to where Merritt lay crumpled on the ballroom floor. He reached Merritt's side within seconds, immediately dropping to his knees beside the unconscious man. Training took over. He checked for responsiveness first. Merritt's eyes were closed, his face gray, his breathing shallow and erratic. Pulse check, rapid, weak, irregular. Cardiac arrest, massive cardiac event. Someone call 911. Tavion shouted to the crowd, though he could hear multiple people already on their phones. "And get me an AED if there's one in this building." He tilted Merritt's head back slightly to clear his airway, then positioned his hands on the center of Merritt's chest. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths. The rhythm he'd practiced thousands of times in training and performed dozens of times in real emergencies. 1, 2, 3, 4. As he worked, Tavion found himself staring down at Merritt's face. The man looked older, unconscious, more fragile, more human. The commanding presence that had filled the ballroom moments ago was gone, replaced by the vulnerability of a body failing despite its owner's wealth and power. Those grey eyes were closed now, but Tavion could see them clearly in his memory. Something about them nagged at him, something familiar. The strong jawline, the silver hair, the bone structure visible even through the stress and aging. He had seen these features before. 15 compressions in, recognition hit him like a physical blow. He had seen those eyes every morning of his life. In the mirror. The grey eyes were exactly the same shade as his own. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes of being called. By then, Tavion had successfully stabilized Merritt enough for transport. The man's pulse was still irregular, and his breathing remained labored, but he was alive. The immediate crisis had passed, though barely. "Nice work, Doc," one of the paramedics said as they loaded Merritt onto the stretcher. "You probably saved his life." Tavion said nothing. He couldn't explain why, but he found himself unable to leave this patient. When the paramedics asked if he was riding along to the hospital, he nodded without hesitation. During the ambulance ride, Tavion sat beside the stretcher watching Merritt's vital signs on the monitor. The man was unconscious but stable. Every few seconds, those grey eyes would flutter slightly, like he was trying to wake up but couldn't quite break through. Those eyes, the same shade as the ones Tavion saw in the mirror every morning. The same steel grey colour that had always made him wonder where they'd come from. Since Jovienne's eyes were deep brown and Grandma Odell's had been hazel, now he was starting to understand. The bone structure was similar too, now that Tavion looked closely. The strong jawline, the way Merritt's ears were set against his head, the shape of his hands, even though they were now pale and lifeless. Tavion had spent his entire life wondering what his father looked like. Now, staring down at this unconscious billionaire, he was beginning to suspect he knew. At Philadelphia General Hospital, Tavion helped transfer Merritt to the cardiac intensive care unit before handing him off to the on-call team. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the attending physician covering the ICU that night, took one look at the EKG strips and immediately began ordering tests. "Massive me," she said grimly. "Probably been building for weeks, maybe months. His arteries are completely blocked." Tavion nodded, his mind operating on 2 levels. Professionally, He was processing the medical information and mentally preparing for the surgical intervention Merritt would need. Personally, he was trying to process something far more complicated. "I'll take over his care when he's stable for surgery," Tavion said. Dr. Martinez looked surprised. "You sure? It's Christmas Eve. I can handle it. I'm sure." He stepped away from the ICU and walked to the hospital's family consultation room, a quiet space where difficult conversations happened every day. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. It was nearly 11 at night. Yovian answered on the second ring. "Tavion? Honey, is everything okay? You sound—" "Mama." His voice came out strange, even to his own ears. Tight, strained, like something was caught in his throat. "I need you to tell me his name." A pause. "Whose name, baby?" "My father's." The silence that followed was deafening. Yovian didn't speak for so long that Tavion wondered if the call had dropped. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could feel the weight of whatever she was processing. "Why are you asking me this tonight?" She finally whispered. "Because I think I just saved his life." Her sharp intake of breath told him everything he needed to know. Even before she spoke the name, he knew what she was going to say. "Merritt," she said so quietly he almost couldn't hear her. "Merritt Whitfield." The confirmation washed over Tavion like ice water. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall, suddenly feeling dizzy. All these years, his father had been one of the most prominent figures in the city. His face appeared on newspaper covers regularly. His name was on buildings throughout Philadelphia. Tavion could have known what his father looked like simply by opening the business section of any newspaper. He could have driven by the Whitfield Industries building any time and seen where his father worked. He could have attended any number of public events where Merritt made appearances. Instead, he'd grown up with a hole where that knowledge should have been. "Why didn't you tell me?" Tavion asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Because he didn't deserve the space in your life, baby." Yovian's voice was thick with tears. "He didn't deserve for you to spend your childhood looking at his picture in magazines, wondering why he didn't want you. You were too precious for that kind of pain." Tears began tracking down Tavion's face. "I could have known, Mama. I could have—" "You could have what? Spent 20 years hoping he'd change his mind? Watching him at charity events and wondering if he ever thought about you? Baby, that man made his choice 32 years ago. I wasn't going to let him hurt you every day by existing in your awareness." Tavion understood her logic, even appreciated it, but it still felt like a fundamental piece of himself had been kept locked away. "He's in bad shape, Mama," he said finally. "His heart, it's in really bad shape." Another pause. Then Jovienne said something that surprised him. "Then you save him, Tavion. Not because he deserves it, but because that's who you are." Merritt Whitfield woke up 2 days after Christmas in the cardiac intensive care unit. The first thing he became aware of was the sound, the steady beeping of monitors, the soft whoosh of ventilation equipment, the distant murmur of hospital activity. His chest felt like someone had driven a truck over it. His throat was raw. Everything hurt. The second thing he noticed was the young black doctor standing at the foot of his bed, reviewing his chart with intense concentration. "Mr. Whitfield," the doctor said without looking up, his voice professional, but carrying an undertone that Merritt couldn't identify. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by a truck," Merritt croaked. His voice came out as a raspy whisper. "What happened?" "You suffered a massive cardiac event at your Gala. Multiple blockages. You're lucky to be alive." The doctor finally looked up from the chart, and Merritt felt something cold settle in his stomach. Something about this young man was unsettling. The confidence in his posture, the way he carried himself with quiet authority, the intelligence in his eyes. And his eyes, they were grey, steel grey, the exact shade Merritt saw in his own mirror every morning. "What's your name, doctor?" Merritt asked slowly, though some part of him already dreaded the answer. "Dr. Tavion Sinclair." The world seemed to tilt off its axis. Sinclair, Yovian's last name. Merritt's heart monitor began beeping faster. His breathing became shallow. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. How old are you? The question came out as a whisper. 32. The doctor, Tavion, set down the chart and finally met Merritt's eyes directly. I was born on October 15, 1992. My mother's name is Jovienne Sinclair. He paused, letting those facts settle. And yes, before you ask, I know exactly who you are. The silence that followed was decades in the making. 32 years of abandonment, absence, and unanswered questions compressed into one impossible moment. Merritt stared at his son, trying to process what was happening. This brilliant doctor, this man who had literally saved his life, was the baby he'd walked away from, the child he'd tried to buy into silence, the son he'd pretended didn't exist. Merritt started, but for the first time in his life, words completely failed him. Save your breath, Tavion said calmly. You need to conserve your energy. You've got at least 2 major blockages, and we'll be taking you into surgery as soon as you're stable enough. Your heart is seriously compromised. The professional diagnosis, delivered with clinical precision by the son he'd abandoned, hit Merritt like a physical blow. Tavion, that's Dr. Sinclair to you. The correction was quiet, but absolutely devastating. I didn't come here for reconciliation, Mr. Whitfield. I came here because you're my patient, and I'm the best cardiologist in this hospital. Your heart is in my hands, whether either of us likes it or not. Merritt's eyes filled with tears, the first he had cried in over 20 years. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Tavion paused at the door, his hand on the frame. He didn't turn around. Sorry doesn't give a boy back his father, Mr. Whitfield. His voice was controlled, but Merritt could hear decades of pain underneath the professional calm. Sorry doesn't undo the birthdays you missed, the graduations you never attended, the nights. I lay awake wondering what was wrong with me that made my own father not want me. His voice cracked slightly before he regained control. Sorry doesn't explain why I had to learn about cardiac conditions by watching my mother come home, exhausted every night, wondering if I was smart enough, strong enough, good enough to make something of myself without ever knowing where half of myself came from. Merritt sobbed, the sound raw and broken in the sterile ICU room. But I'll tell you what sorry can do, Mr. Whitfield, Tavion continued, still not turning around. It can be a starting point, if you survive this. And despite everything you put my mother through, despite 32 years of pretending I didn't exist, I intend to make sure you do survive. He finally turned, his grey eyes, so much like Merritt's own, meeting his father's gaze directly. Because that's who I am. That's who my mother raised me to be. Someone who saves lives not because people deserve it, but because that's what healers do. Tavion straightened his white coat and picked up the chart again. Your surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. I'll be leading the surgical team. Try to get some rest. He walked out, leaving Merritt alone with the weight of 32 years of regret and the stunning realization that the son he'd abandoned had grown up to become exactly the kind of man Merritt had spent his whole life pretending to be. Honorable, compassionate, someone who put principle before profit and character before convenience. Everything Merritt had failed to be when it mattered most. The monitors beeped steadily around him as Merritt lay in that hospital bed, finally understanding the true cost of the choice he'd made 3 decades ago. He hadn't just lost a son, he'd lost the chance to be the kind of father who could be proud of raising someone like Tavion. Now his heart, literally and figuratively, was in the hands of the man he'd thrown away. And somehow, despite everything, that man was going to try to save him. The surgery was a complete success. Tavion led the surgical team with hands that remained absolutely steady, despite the emotional earthquake happening inside his chest. For 4 hours he worked on his biological father's heart, clearing blockages, placing stents, rebuilding pathways that would allow blood to flow freely again. He performed flawlessly, not because Merritt deserved his best work, but because that's who Jovienne had raised him to be, someone who rose above circumstances, someone who led with excellence regardless of personal cost, someone who understood that healing was about the patient, not the healer. When the last suture was complete, and Merritt's heart was beating strong and steady, Tavion stepped back from the operating table and felt something shift inside himself. He had just saved the life of the man who had abandoned him. He had chosen to heal instead of harm. He had proven that his mother's love had been stronger than his father's absence. The recovery took weeks, but Merritt survived. More than that, he seemed transformed by his brush with death and the overwhelming realization of everything he had missed. The proud, commanding billionaire had been replaced by a humbled man who understood that wealth meant nothing without genuine human connection. 3 weeks after the surgery, Merritt made a request that surprised everyone. He asked to meet with Yovienne. "I need to face her," he told Tavion during a post-surgery consultation. "I need to acknowledge what I did. I need to try to make amends, even though I know I don't deserve forgiveness." Tavion studied his father's face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving motivation. He found none. What he saw was genuine remorse, and something he'd never expected to see in Merritt Whitfield's eyes. Genuine humility. "I'll ask her," Tavion said finally, "but the choice is hers." Yovienne came to the hospital the following week. She walked into Merritt's private room with Curtis by her side, her head held high and her spine straight. 32 years had passed since she'd last seen the man who had broken her heart and tried to buy his way out of fatherhood. At 50 years old, Yovienne was more beautiful than she had ever been. Silver streaked her hair in elegant patterns. Laugh lines framed eyes that held hard-earned wisdom. Every mark of time on her face had been earned through struggle, triumph, and the deep satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. Merritt wept when he saw her. "Yovienne," he whispered. "You came—" "Don't flatter yourself," she said calmly, settling into the chair beside his bed. "I didn't come for you. I came for my son. He needed closure. And I won't let your guilty conscience become another burden for him to carry." Curtis stood behind her chair, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. The contrast was stark. The man who had chosen to love her and the man who had chosen to abandon her, both in the same room. "I was a coward," Merritt said. "Yes," Yovienne agreed without hesitation. "You were. I've spent every day of the last 32 years pretending I didn't have regrets. But I did. Every single day." Yovienne studied his face with the clinical assessment of someone who had spent decades reading people's pain. "Do you want to know what the hardest part was, Merritt?" she asked. "It wasn't the struggle. It wasn't working double shifts or scraping together tuition money or raising a child alone. The hardest part was watching my son grow up with a hole in his heart where a father should have been, and knowing the man who put that hole there was living his life like we didn't exist." Merritt closed his eyes, absorbing the weight of her words. "I know I can't undo it," he said finally. "I can't go back. I can't give Tavion back his childhood, or give you back the years you struggled alone, but I want a chance. Not to be forgiven, I haven't earned that, but to at least try to be present now. Whatever that looks like." Yovienne was quiet for a long moment, studying this broken man who had once seemed so powerful. "Then you prove it," she said finally. "Day by day, you prove that people can change, even stubborn old fools who threw away the most precious gifts they'd ever been given." What followed took months. The road to rebuilding what had been shattered was neither quick nor simple. There were difficult conversations that lasted hours and painful revelations that hurt everyone involved. Tavion struggled with anger he'd suppressed for over 20 years. Merritt struggled with the crushing weight of understanding exactly what his choices had cost. But slowly, very slowly, something began to grow. Merritt made fundamental changes to his foundation, redirecting resources toward community hospitals, and establishing scholarships specifically for underprivileged students pursuing medical careers. He didn't ask for recognition or publicity. He simply did the work, learning for the first time in his life what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. He asked Tavion to teach him how to be a better man. "I don't know if I can," Tavion admitted one afternoon over coffee. "I don't know if I trust you enough to try." "Then let me earn it," Merritt said. "Day by day. Give me the chance to prove that people can change, that even someone like me can learn to put love before legacy." Tavion looked across the table at this man, his father, and saw something he hadn't expected. genuine remorse, genuine hope, genuine humanity. "Okay," he said finally. Day by day, 1 year later, the Whitfield Foundation held its Christmas gala once again. But this year, everything was different. Merritt Whitfield took the stage not alone, but flanked by two people who had transformed. His understanding of what success really meant, Dr. Tavion Sinclair and Jovienne Curtis. "Ladies and gentlemen," Merritt began, his voice stronger than it had been in years, thanks to both his son's medical expertise and his newfound sense of purpose. "I've spent most of my life believing that success was measured by the size of one's bank account and the power of one's connections." He paused, looking out at the crowd of Philadelphia's elite. "Tonight, I stand before you a humbled man, because I've learned that true success is measured by the love we give, the responsibility we accept, and the courage to face our failures." He turned to look at Jovienne and Tavion, tears glistening in his eyes. 32 years ago, I abandoned the two most important people I would ever know because I was too afraid to fight for them. I let fear and prejudice and weakness dictate my choices. I missed watching my son grow into the extraordinary man he is today, a man who, despite every reason to let me fail, saved my life. His voice broke slightly. "I cannot reclaim the years I lost. I cannot undo the pain I caused, but I can use whatever time I have left to be the man I should have been all along." The applause was thunderous, but Merritt barely heard it. He was watching his son's face, seeing not forgiveness, which would take more time, but acceptance, a willingness to try. It was more than he deserved. It was everything. Sometimes the person who abandoned you becomes the person who needs you most. And sometimes the ultimate victory is becoming someone who helps anyway, not because they deserve it, but because that's who you choose to be. Sometimes healing the broken requires first becoming whole yourself. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so extraordinary that their absence becomes their loss, not yours. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about forgiveness or family or what it means to rise above your circumstances, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Drop a comment below telling me which lesson from this story touched you the most. Was it the courage to walk away from what doesn't serve you? The reminder that your beginning doesn't determine your ending? Or the truth that real fathers are the ones who choose to show up? And if you haven't already, subscribe to Mr. Roman's Story Vault and hit that notification bell. We deliver stories like this one every single week. Stories that entertain, inspire, and remind you of what truly matters in life. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life might be changed by a story. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community, and I'll see you in the next one.